Welcome, poker players, to our very first poker video. I decided to test out shooting this halfway through a heads-up match the other day with another player. We're both very deep stacked with 400k apiece, 1,000, 2,000 blind. This gives us a chance to play a lot of poker, mix it up a bit. We've been playing this for about 10 minutes when I get 10-7 suited on the button. My opponent has been playing extremely tight so far, so my strategy was to keep jabbing at small pots until a big spot presents itself to get stacks in. I raised to 8k, 4 times the big blind. I get called. On the flop, I do the standard continuation bet and take down the pot. Right now, I'm just playing my position, not caring much about the strength of my actual hand. A lot of times in the amateur poker ranks, we play our hands way too passively, waiting for a big holding like aces, kings, jacks, queens, tens, ace, king. I want to exploit this tendency, especially with position, and I do this by taking shots at the pot, small shots with all sorts of creative hands. Now, this doesn't mean that I advise players to jump into the OK Corral shootout armed only with a pitchfork. It just means that in poker, there are several factors that are way more important than your actual hand. I tell my players to approach poker from the perspective of a fluid, almost like water, adjusting to whatever container you're in or whatever the table dynamics offer you at the time. If the competition is too loose, tighten up a bit. If they're too aggressive, slow down and trap more. If they're too tight, loosen up and attack small pots. Play the player and let the poker take care of itself. Now we find ourselves in a position where we get ace king pre-flop. That's very tricky, especially heads up. And one of the things that I try to tell my players is that in the amateur poker range, we got to make sure that we get value with our strong holdings. This doesn't quite work in the higher levels of poker. You have to start balancing your range a lot. But in the amateur poker range, a lot of players are not even paying attention to your bet size. They're not paying attention to your holdings. The only thing they care about is their two cards in front of them. So make sure that you get a lot of value out of your premium hands. And you're going to be surprised how often you get called with ace X and even raised with a player who has ace 7, ace 3. I like to also caution players to stay away from what I call the Phil Ivey problem. This is when players, especially amateur poker players, they watch TV, watch ESPN, WSOP, and they see all of these professional poker players making all types of weird plays with interesting hands. We should definitely avoid this, especially in the amateur poker range, simply because you're dealing with players that are actually not going to be paying attention to what you're doing. So I'll find a lot of players trying to bluff calling stations and things of that nature, which is just not going to be profitable over the long term. So try not to get reckless with silly hands, especially out of position. Probably the last thing that I want to bring to everyone's attention is we have to recognize where we're at. We're the amateur poker market. So what that means is there's a lot of information out there that players are giving off. I see a lot of players, they are not paying attention to the information that's going around the table. As soon as they're dealt cards, they immediately start looking at their cards. And as a result, you're missing a lot of information that's out there that players are giving off when they look at their hand. So I tell everyone to make sure that you wait till it's your turn to act. Make sure you pay attention to what's going on with other players that they're checking their hold cards. In this particular hand, we flop a boat. I check, the player checks, and we see a turn. And mostly I check because there's nothing really that he can have that I can get any value from. If I bet too much, he's gonna fold. You can fold ace king there. You can fold king nine there. So right now, I want to give player a chance to catch up. And what happens is the seven comes on the turn, and I just do a little small filler bet. I probably could have made it 4,000, maybe even 5,000, just to see if the player hit anything at all, and to try to build the pot up for possibly something big on the river. Well, what happens here is I see the player checks his card. And that's what I mean about making sure you're paying attention to what's going on at the table. When the river came, the player checked his card. And I got the impression that he hit something. I'm not sure how strong it was. I wasn't sure if it was ace eight or maybe it was 7-8. But I didn't actually put him on the straight, but I got the impression that he hit something on the river just by the way he double checked his hole cards and looked at me to see what I was doing. So now the whole while I'm putting together this big bet, I'm watching how he's responding to it. And the more he seems like he is confident, the more chips I put into the pot. He goes all in with a straight. I call immediately with my bolt. And that's the end of this poker lesson. So just forgive me for the audio right now. I just purchased a $70 microphone. Hopefully it'll be here this week. So thanks a lot for joining us. See you again.